Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. The Readiness Subcommittee of the House Armed Services Committee will come to order. I welcome each of you to this hearing, the Department of Defense's fiscal year 2019 budget request for military construction, facilities investment, environmental restoration and compliance, installation energy resilience, and other infrastructure issues pertinent to the warfighter and our national security. Today, the subcommittee will hear from our witnesses how the Department and the military services are posturing to meet the military infrastructure needs of the nation both today and in the future. Over the past few years, the House Armed Services Committee leadership has led the call to provide the military with the resources necessary to counter advances by our adversaries. Regretfully, years of underfunding and substantial budgetary inability have, up till now, hampered these efforts. I am grateful that Congress and the administration have worked together to provide the military what they need to begin to reverse the erosion of our military strength. There is agreement on funding levels for defense for the fiscal year 2019. We have a top line from which to work with, but as General Joe Dunford said late last week in testimony before the full committee, quote, "We cannot reverse a decade plus of erosion in one fiscal year," end of quote. Today, the Readiness Subcommittee meets to hear how this year's President's budget intends to address installation and infrastructure readiness writ large. Across the spectrum of operations, our military installations are essential to the readiness of the warfighter, their families, and the wholeness of the various missions and support provided by our selfless Department of Defense civilian workforce. While clear progress is being made in many budgetary fronts, funding across the installations portfolio remains somewhat flat, if not headed in the wrong direction in some cases, which is a cause for concern. Aggravating the underfunding problem, the cost and complexity of infrastructure required to support modern weapon systems such as the fifth-generation aircraft is consuming a growing, and I am concerned, an unsustainable portion of the overall construction top line. I am committed to work with the Department to achieve reforms that further improve the lethality of our installations to enable our military to be more agile and more efficient. The challenges are great, but working together, we can ensure that the military has the most relevant and effective infrastructure backbone to prepare what will meet them in the field. Before I introduce the witnesses, I turn to the distinguished ranking member of this Readiness Subcommittee, the gentlelady from the territory of Guam, Congresswoman Bardot, for her opening statements.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And thank you to our witnesses for being here today. I do look forward to hearing how the FY19 budget will help the department overcome deficits in MILCON, facilities sustainment, restoration and maintenance programs, environmental and energy programs, and ultimately contribute to military readiness and the security of our great nation. Mr. Chairman, I would like to take a moment first, but I don't see them in the audience, but when they do arrive, I will be introducing the members of the Guam Chamber of Commerce who met with you this morning. We had a very interesting meeting. These are members of the Armed Services Committee. Our military installations provide the platform from which our military is able to project power and build readiness. Maintaining these installations is important for our war fighters and just as important to the quality of life of our service members and their families. Like Chairman Wilson, I am concerned by the toll that more than a decade of budget risk and instability has had on the military installations and the military infrastructure. We are facing a more than $70 billion backlog of deferred maintenance and repairs on our installations. And this number will continue to grow unless the department changes its approach to installation investments. The recent budget agreement provided additional resources to the Department of Defense for FY 2018 and FY 2019. And the department has indicated its top priority is to use these additional funds to help restore military readiness. However, as we review the budget request, I remain concerned that the emphasis has been on procuring new equipment rather than focusing on the O&M and Milcon accounts that support the facilities, the maintenance, and training that enables readiness. Unfortunately, the budget request for the infrastructure account seemed to reinforce my concern, with funding largely requested at levels below the FY18 amount. Construction is being largely consumed by new mission requirements and sustainment, as well below the OSD directed goal of 90%. So with that in mind, it is my hope that our witnesses can share how the FY19 budget request will help restore the readiness of our military installations and how the department will leverage the new authorities and flexibilities that have been provided by Congress in the recent NDAAs. I do, however, appreciate the administration's support of the Readiness and Environmental Protection Program, which prevents civilian development from encroaching on our military installations. The REPI program also promotes land conservation in partnership with willing landowners and local communities. And I appreciate the department including $75 million for the REPI program in the President's fiscal year 2019 budget request. And I support funding this program at the requested amount. Finally, I encourage the witnesses to share specific examples of how unpredictable funding contributed to installation management challenges and impacted the quality of life for our servicemen and their families. And I look forward to the discussion we will have today. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
And thank you very much, Congresswoman Bardot. And I appreciate when you said that the delegation from Guam found the office interesting. It was interesting because when they arrived, they noticed that I had a clock indicating what time it was. It's always tomorrow in Guam. And so it's, in fact, right now it's 4:08 in the morning, tomorrow. So we'll keep up with this. My appreciation of Guam. I'm pleased to recognize our witnesses today and thank them for taking time to be with us. Secretary Lucian Niemeyer, we will begin with you and look forward to your opening statement.
Appreciate the opportunity, Chairman Wilson, Ranking Member Bardot, and distinguished members of the subcommittee to speak to you today about the President's budget and our priorities within that budget. We look forward to working with the committee to support our defense missions and the quality of life for our members and family members who are called to sacrifice so much for our country on a daily basis. First and foremost, we are very grateful to Congress for the recent enacted Bipartisan Budget Act of 2018, which begins the recovery from the significant impacts of sequestration. We now have a responsibility to ensure and honor the trust of the American people by spending every dollar wisely, and that's our plan. Early this year, the President released a national security strategy, which then guided the development of a national defense strategy to clearly articulate the threats and challenges our nation faces. Our mission is clear. We must be prepared to defend the homeland, to remain the preeminent military power in the world, and advance an international order that promotes security and prosperity. The strategy confronts the stark reality that the homeland is no longer a sanctuary. The strategy also requires each of us in the department to drive budget discipline and affordability in order to ensure direct resources directed to the highest warfighter requirements. Our budget priorities presented to you today establishes a foundation to rebuild the agility, resilience, readiness, and lethality of our armed forces. With a clear understanding of the strategy, we have set forth the following objectives to confront the challenges that posed by years of underfunded facility and infrastructure accounts. First, we are using every program and funding source available to eliminate waste in DoD infrastructure. We continue to advocate for adequate funding for installations accounts. We are protecting installations and ranges from incompatible development and improving combat credibility of our nation's test and training ranges. We are enhancing our energy security. We are exploring new opportunities for third-party partnerships. We are working with our military engineer and contracting communities to develop smarter contracts and to execute our contracts smartly. We continue to provide for the welfare of our people and resources through unparalleled environmental stewardship and occupational safety programs. And most importantly, we continue and will continue to collaborate with the hundreds of defense communities around the country who support our bases and provide for our troops and their families. I can't emphasize that last point enough. These guiding principles will allow us to apply the resources requested in this budget to achieve real results. The requested $10.5 billion in military construction and family housing programs makes significant progress in recapitalizing facilities. But this year's funding, as you both pointed out, will not fully reverse the impacts of 6 years of sequestration. We currently have an unfunded maintenance backlog exceeding $116 billion. 23% of the department's facilities are in poor condition. Another 9% are in failing condition. My frank assessment to you today is it may be too costly to buy ourselves out of this backlog. We must work to remove unneeded capacity in order to fund higher priorities. As noted in the National Defense Strategy, we continue to reduce excess infrastructure and will work with Congress for options for base realignment and closures. These efforts will be enhanced by a careful evaluation we are undertaking of how and when we base new forces and new capabilities. For example, the basing of new hypersonic systems, autonomous vehicles, cyber forces will have an impact on their lethality. Likewise, there are station implications in the training and deployment of directed energy programs, electronic warfare, and artificial intelligence programs. In lieu of another request this year to authorize a BRAC round, we are reviewing our facility usage. For instance, we must ensure that facilities that were sized for 100 personnel actually have 100 personnel in them. We also have proposed increased efforts to demolish our facilities we don't need. We are reducing leases in order to move back into on-base and into facilities. Our efforts will get us part of the way, but we need your support for a fair, objective, and transparent process for future base realignments and closures. We're facing other challenges head-on. We're managing the impact of increased cost of labor and materials resulting from adverse weather around the country we experienced last year on our military construction execution. We are proactively improving MILCOM project delivery and contract management processes to deliver power projection projects on schedule and within budget. Given the risks documented recently by the Department of Homeland Security, the Department's energy programs are focused on energy security for critical facilities. We appreciate your support for the Energy Resilience and Conservation Improvement Program to improve infrastructure resilience while still maintaining a payback. We are also urgently identifying resources to improve the cyber protection of our facility-related control systems. The Department's environmental budget supports activities ranging from managing critical habitats to addressing drinking water health advisories to making the best use of limited cleanup dollars. We are committed to reduce a $27 billion backlog, which is the second in the entire DoD inventory, while sustaining our reputation as the nation's premier steward of natural resources and cultural assets. Our warfighters also need access to unencumbered land, water, and airspace to hone their readiness and lethality without compromising health and safety. We are heavily engaged with other federal agencies to provide larger and more realistic air and sea ranges with less maneuver restrictions to better simulate battlefields and threats around the world. Our commitment is to provide combat-credible test and training ranges. In summation, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, we have both challenges and opportunities in support of our new National Defense Strategy. We have a determined sense of urgency to achieve results now, knowing that each achievement deters aggression by our adversaries. We appreciate congressional support for our military and look forward very much to working with you on our priorities. Thank you.
And thank you very much, Secretary Niemeyer. We now proceed to Secretary Phyllis Bayer, and please proceed with your opening statement.
Ranking Member Bardot, other members of the committee, it is an honor to appear before you today to testify on the readiness of the Department of the Navy's energy installations and environmental portfolio. I've had the honor and the privilege of serving in this position for about 8 weeks. And while I'm by no means fully up to speed on all the issues affecting our infrastructure, our facilities, and our ranges, I have had the opportunity to visit several installations and witness firsthand many of the challenges that our installation professionals are facing. More importantly, my visits have confirmed my appreciation for the strategic importance and the contributions to readiness that our installations provide. I strongly believe that readiness begins at our installations, and I understand that my job is all about delivering readiness to the fleet and the operating forces. I want to start by first thanking you as well for all your support for the fiscal year 2018, the omnibus bill, and we ask for your continued support for the President's fiscal year 2019 budget. While these additional appropriations are important and they're very helpful, they won't solve all of our infrastructure problems and the facility-related problems that we have. We have more work to do to properly maintain facilities and modernize our infrastructure to deliver readiness better, faster, cheaper, and in full support of the National Defense Strategy and in support of Secretary Mattis and Secretary Spencer's priorities. Thank you also for the new authorities that you have provided us. Congresswoman Bardot mentioned those. These authorities give our base commanders the flexibility they need to modernize these infrastructures, and they can make smart business decisions with greater options available to them. It helps them to be more creative, and that's a good thing. You have a copy of my written detailed statement. However, I'd like to highlight 3 areas where I'm working to improve installation readiness. First, in the area of safety, and then I'll touch briefly on energy and our environmental programs. The strength of our Navy and Marine Corps team resides in the incredibly talented community of over 800,000 sailors, Marines, their families, and the civilians and the contractors that support them. And I'm truly honored to represent them and to support them here today. I care about the safety and the health of each and every one of them. Our operational environment is obviously inherently dangerous. However, we must always do everything that we can to ensure that their working environments are safe. I am committed to enhancing the Navy and the Marine Corps' culture of safety and to leverage best practices to do so. The gold standard is that of the OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration's Voluntary Protection Program. It's a program of which I am personally a very big fan. This is a proven effective program that focuses everyone's attention on safety in the workplace, and it works. It keeps our people more safe from mishaps, and I'm encouraging all of our installations to enroll in the VPP program to generate a vivid, persistent awareness on safe work practices. A safer workplace will improve our ability to deliver more readiness to the force. In our energy program, we're working to improve our ability to deliver readiness by making installations more resilient against threats and vulnerabilities, cyber attacks, power interruptions, or disruptions. Our focus is sharp, and we're working to ensure that the critical facilities have the appropriate backup power supplies, often using public-private partnerships that leverage the use of other people's talent and money to ensure that our installations are fortified to deliver readiness. Regarding our commitment to being good stewards of the environment, we continue to make progress in the area of natural and cultural resource management programs. And in one area that I know is on the minds of many is that of emerging contaminants. I want to assure you that I am fully committed to transparency and to keep you and your staffs and your communities, who are our neighbors, fully informed as we address this issue and ensure safe drinking water for all. Lastly, I want to ask for your support in an important area, and that is protecting our test and training ranges from encroachment. Today, these ranges face all forms of encroachment: development, crowded areas, even frequency spectrum. And the Earth is getting more crowded every day. And it's critically important that our sailors and Marines have these ranges where they can practice realistic training and where we can conduct testing in realistic conditions. And when I say realistic, that's an environment that is as similar to the combat environment that we can possibly make it, so that sailors and Marines can gain the confidence they need and they can be ready for the next fight. Many of our ranges, land, over the sea, under the water, are threatened by encroachment. These are complicated matters, and they require collaboration and discussion. And while we strive to be compatible with our neighbors, we must always ensure that these valuable national assets are protected and not further impacted by encroachment. In closing, I realize that the past funding levels forced our leadership to focus only on the most important operational requirements, as Congresswoman Bardot mentioned. And that was the right thing. However, it did come with a great impact to our shore infrastructure. We have a lot of challenges, and we have a lot of issues, and they are complex. But I'm excited to face the challenges with your help. I look forward to working with each of you to make this happen, and I appreciate your time, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
And thank you very much, Secretary Bayer. We now proceed to Secretary John Henderson. Please proceed with your opening statement.
Chairman Wilson, Ranking Member Bardot, and distinguished members of this committee, I'm honored to represent our American Airmen who honorably serve our nation and to discuss the Air Force's fiscal year 2019 energy, installations, and environmental budget request. I've submitted my full written statement for the record, but I would just like to hit a few key points today. The Air Force fiscal year 2019 President's budget request for infrastructure totals $8.75 billion. In our request, national defense strategy priorities to restore readiness and cost-effectively modernize continue to drive difficult choices across our portfolio. These choices are necessary to build a more lethal and ready force. Consequently, we chose to accept risk by deferring some infrastructure funding requirements in a deliberate effort to provide the increased funding necessary to accelerate modernization and restore full combat readiness. To mitigate this risk, we are proactively leveraging an asset management framework to ensure that we are focusing our resources on the right facilities, at the right time, with the right scope of work. To this end, we are developing analytic tools to process huge amounts of data into predictive metrics, which will help improve the timeliness and prioritization of our future infrastructure investments. We are also reforming our business processes to incorporate economies of scale across the infrastructure portfolio. Our intent is to significantly reduce the cost and time required to complete infrastructure projects, while also expanding our overall capacity to deliver them when there are funds available. We continue to use innovative funding tools like enhanced use leases, public-private partnerships, and energy savings performance contracts to support our mission, our airmen, and their families. Looking ahead, we plan to use the additional authorities provided to us in the FY17 and FY18 NDAAs, which will further assist us in managing our infrastructure more effectively. Our 2019 budget request includes $1.78 billion in military construction funds to support urgent combatant commander requirements, the bed down of the F-35 and the KC-46, presidential aircraft recapitalization, research and test facilities modernization, and other mission-critical requirements. Our budget also requests $3.36 billion in facility sustainment, restoration, and modernization, $2.45 billion to operate existing facilities, $395 million for military housing, and $680 million to support environmental compliance and restoration. In total, our fiscal year 2019 infrastructure budget request represents a strategic balance for capability and capacity and ensures that we are best postured to field a ready and lethal force today while concurrently modernizing for the challenges of tomorrow. On behalf of our Air Force, please accept our sincere thanks for your demonstrated support through the bipartisan budget agreement, which provides much-needed budgetary relief in FY18 and FY19, and also provides funds for military construction projects that were on our unfunded priority list. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Secretary Henderson. We're grateful now to proceed to the last witness, Acting Secretary of the Army for Installations and Environment, Mr. Jordan Gillis. And please proceed with your opening statement.
Thank you, sir. Chairman Wilson, Ranking Member Bardot, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to discuss the installations, energy, and environmental component of the Army's fiscal year 19 budget request. Let me first reiterate what Mr. Niemeyer said, in that we appreciate all the hard work behind the bipartisan budget agreement of 2018 and are grateful for the resources that will allow us to begin to recover from the effects of sequestration. The Army's #1 priority is readiness. Army readiness begins on Army installations. We will use our funding to address readiness by prioritizing our investments where we believe we'll see the greatest returns and contribute to increases in readiness. In the near term, sustainment, restoration, and modernization investments will help address the number of facilities we have in poor and failing condition and make sure that current facilities meet the needs of the force. More medium term, investing in MILCON will provide new facilities where required. And underpinning it all, investing in energy resilience and addressing our environmental obligations will help ensure that we have the installation and land resources we need to train, fight, and win our nation's wars. Thank you for the opportunity to come before you today and for your continued support of the soldiers, civilians, and families of the Army. Look forward to working with you and your staffs on this and future years' requests, and I look forward to your questions today.
Whoops, thank you very much for being here today, and I haven't seen somebody so brief and so long. Thank you very much. Hey, I'd like to remind each of the subcommittee members that we will adhere to the 5-minute rule for questions of the witnesses, beginning with me, and fortunately we have the leadership of a professional staff member, Andrew Schulman, who will keep the time. And so beginning right now, Secretary Niemeyer, I want to thank you for being here today, and I'd like to recognize your many years of service in the Senate as a professional staff member, and especially your service as an Air Force officer. And we are grateful to have a veteran of your distinction and experience in the Pentagon. We thank you for all that you've done and continue to do for our nation. Even before I get to my first question, something that got my attention that you testified was about destructive weather. And last year, and this, any of you, if you know what might have occurred, but with the hurricanes that we had last year that were devastating, whether in the Gulf of Mexico or on the East Coast, what is the government self-insured, and what were the costs of recovery?
So we submitted an amendment for emergency appropriations. I don't have the exact dollar amount that we went into repair facilities. I can get that for the record. We still continue to recover down in Puerto Rico, particularly our military installations there, and to some degree in Florida. We're in pretty good shape from an operational perspective. As you know, also the Corps of Engineers is involved in the restoration of power in Puerto Rico. That particular part is being worked directly between FEMA, the Corps, and the White House on the restoration of power. But for us, we're in pretty good shape from an operational perspective. We think we got the funding we needed. We still have some repairs we still need to do, but we're recovering well. My concern was more as the budget climate, the bid climate, as there's a lot of work going on down there, and concern is going to drive our bids up in other places in the country.
Well, thank you for addressing that, and additionally, thank you for raising, obviously, the Caribbean and how important that is.
Absolutely.
And the installations, whether in the Virgin Islands or back over to Puerto Rico. And but you have everything else. I'm going to get to
no worries.
A question. You have so much to be thinking about, and then you have that on the side. So how incredible. And we recognize it may not be practical to ever provide enough funding to eliminate the growing need of backlog for maintenance of facilities and repairs, while simultaneously constructing modern facilities to our emerging warfare requirements. This is where I think innovation has to play a key role. The Congress has enacted numerous provisions over the past few years targeted at accelerating and expanding your authorities to execute construction and repair projects in a timely and cost-effective manner. Could you speak at a strategic level on your priorities and your plan of action to ensure the maximum return on the limited facility investments that you are able to bring to bear? Also, is there anything that Congress can do to help you in achieving those priorities?
Yep. I think my fellow witnesses thank this committee particularly for taking the lead over the last few years on allowing some flexibility in how we can use operations and maintenance funds to be able to address some repurposing of buildings. We think that's absolutely stunning to be able to do that. That allows us to be much more effective in how we use our infrastructure and how we can then reuse our infrastructure. I want to thank the committee for that. We did get some additional authorities for using funding for restoration of our labs. That's fantastic, and we're moving not as quickly as we would like to on that, but we're starting to get some traction on some of those projects. As far as new authorities, Congressman, I would love to work with you and your staff. There's a lot of things I've got ideas on, and I think there are ways we can provide flexibility. My concern, overarching concern, is to maintain the commitment we have to the American people that we put our dollars towards the highest priorities, and that's going to be tough to do right now. We do have some challenges in front of us that we have to. We were given a short amount of time in the own operations and maintenance accounts before they expire here on September 30th. So we're working very diligently to try to provide as much flexibility in the contracting world to allow us to be able to carry out projects in the next 5 months to address those readiness needs. So I don't necessarily need anything legislatively right now. I just need to be able to execute, and that's what I'm working on.
Well, I'm encouraged by your flexibility of all of you, and particularly proactively demolition, mothballing, whatever can be done to facilities usage, so that it's to the benefit of the taxpayer and to our military and military families. So thank each of you, and I now proceed to Congresswoman Bardot.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I hope this doesn't count against my 5 minutes, but I would like to take a moment to acknowledge members of the Guam Chamber of Commerce who have just arrived. They are members of the Armed Forces Committee, and they're here all week with members and staff who are advocating for programs that support our military and enhance the security. Would you kindly stand? I guess there's just two of them. They're at other meetings. One is the chairman of the Armed Services Committee, and the other is the president of the Guam Chamber. Thank you very much.
We're delighted that Joe and Ms. Camacho are here. So Ms. Castro are here. So best wishes, and indeed, your time now begins.
All right, thank you. Let's see now here. Where's my? I lost my place. I was so excited. All right. Again, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for my time here. And my first question is for Mr. Niemeyer. And I want to thank him for meeting with the chamber yesterday.
Yes,
and
ma'am.
They were very, very elated after the meeting with you. You gave them hope for the advancement of our military buildup on Guam. Thank you very much, Lucian.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. So my first question is, the 2006 Defense Policy Review Initiative includes the relocation of 5,000 Marines from Okinawa to Guam by 2026. Now, as you know, the construction industry in Guam relies on workers hired under the Immigration Naturalization Act H-2B program from nearby countries. Without the H-2B workers, the buildup will face significant challenges and postponements. So I included a provision in last year's defense bill to help address the workforce issue on Guam, and am currently working on additional language in this year's bill. So with that in mind, please confirm that the realignment of Marines to Guam remains a priority for you in the Department of Defense. And moreover, does the department support additional legislation to ensure a sufficient construction and healthcare workforce is available on Guam to support this realignment?
Yes, ma'am. I really appreciate the question. I've been in this position for 8 months. Within the first 3 weeks of me assuming this position, I was on a plane to Guam. Spent a few days there. Once again, as I've been there plenty of times, as you know, making sure that our plans are on track and we are addressing the issues. And I spent some time with both the governor and some other DOD officials, making sure that what is the impact we're having of recent changes in policy on visa restrictions. Your work last year was stellar in allowing us at least to free up some visas. I'm talking to Governor Calvo's staff. I think we're starting to see a little flexibility starting to break free. As you know, we share your concern that it did not go far enough. We are still committed to a one Guam approach, that what we're working with the Department of Defense not only affects our national security on Guam, but also works with our neighbors, our community too. So we fully support. We know you have another bill pending, and hopefully we'll see that through to expand the that visa requirements, or some of the extend the visa H-2B program to include other than just military support for military construction. We believe the entirety of the Guam economy, a vibrant Guam economy, is actually a national security priority, and we support you in that.
Thank you, Assistant Secretary. This means a great deal to us. We've been at this since 2003, so it's been a long, long time, and we are now progressing. And my next question is for Assistant Secretary Bayer. I had the opportunity to meet with her the other day, and she too is very supportive of our move to the Marines to Guam. So I want to continue. My question to you, Secretary Bayer, is to monitor the progress of the MEC clearance operations and its impact on the cost and the schedule of military construction projects on Guam. While I noted late last year the Navy issued waivers for 3 specific projects, these waivers were for projects that were either completed or nearly so, and the committee continues to remain concerned about the progress and the Navy's way ahead. So can you please provide an update on the steps that the Navy is taking to reduce the impact to the cost and the schedule of military construction projects? Will you also commit to working with all stakeholders to minimize the impacts of the MEC clearance requirements on the Marine Corps relocation to Guam?
Yes, ma'am. Congresswoman Bardot, absolutely. I'll answer your second question first, as you absolutely have my commitment to work and stay focused on the cost and the schedule. Just last week, this is an important issue for a lot of us over here on this side of the table. Just last week, Mr. Henderson asked us for some help on trying to expedite progress on construction, and we got together and had a very good discussion on the very latest of what is going on with the munitions of explosive content with the MEC. What we've learned is that some additional people have been added to the workforce there, so we think that that is going to be a big help. I shared that with you in the office the other day. And what we also learned is that the explosive safety survey that was being used for the clearance process is being updated. And not only that, it's being updated for 16 areas, which we think the survey now is going to give better fidelity to the people on the ground so that they can give the information to the construction workers quicker and they can clear areas faster. So we are focused on it, as is Mr. Henderson, and you have my commitment to continue to do so.
Thank you very much. And I only have 6 seconds left, so will there be a second round, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Congresswoman Bardot. We now proceed to Congresswoman Stefanik of New York.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As all of our panelists know today, movement of troops and materials is vital to our national security. And I have some concerns at a base that I represent, Fort Drum, which is an Army installation in New York's 21st District. We have inadequate rail lines. And that infrastructure is critical to supporting the necessary throughput of troops and materials, and it's important for training. This is also important when it comes to European infrastructure, where plans call for the movement of entire armored brigades via rail. How is this lack of capacity being mitigated and synchronized when it comes to our operations plans? Acting Secretary Gillis, I'll go to you.
Thank you. I appreciate the question. So the Army has identified 4 power projection platforms, including Fort Drum, Fort Bliss, Fort Bragg, and Joint Base Lewis McChord that have significant rail shortfalls that impact mission readiness. We're currently evaluating our power projection capacity in coordination with applicable operation plans through a recently established power projection working group. This ongoing review will enable an updated optimal investment strategy to modernize the Army's power projection platforms. Once we've completed and validated the results of that effort, we'll certainly work to schedule a briefing for you and other committee members as required. But power projection platform infrastructure requirements are nested in the Army's overall installation readiness framework, and we understand for us as well as you, those are a high priority item.
Thank you for that. This is an extremely high priority, and particularly because Fort Drum is home to the 10th Mountain Division, the most deployed unit in the U.S. Army since 9/11. It's a priority for our base, it's a priority for the Army, and I want to work to make sure that we can make that investment when it comes to our infrastructure and power projection. My next question is for Assistant Secretary Niemeyer. Another unique asset that we have at Fort Drum is a renewable energy facility. We have a biomass facility. It means the installation is 100% energy secure and 100% renewable. I'd like to hear your comments about that model and the strength of that model and potentially taking that model and learning from it at other installations across the country.
Yes, ma'am. First of all, what you've done at Fort Drum is, I think, eventually where we want to get to with the rest of the Department of Defense. We want to be able to ensure our own power supply, that we could potentially, if we needed to, come off the grid and continue to power our critical missions. So what you've done there is amazing, and it does serve the model of what both the Army and the Department of Defense is looking at. We do have some concerns moving forward on tying ourselves to a particular fuel source. As you know, we are running into some challenges there with the biomass compared to the cost of natural gas. I think we're going to build off that and look, okay, where do we build some flexibility in there so we're not beholden to just one type of fuel generation source. And we'll be looking to use that model around the country. We definitely are shifting our goals. For in the past, we were really focusing on just renewable generation sources. We're now open up the gates, whatever we feel is most effective to provide us that energy security that Fort Drum has, and we're going to use any energy source. It was a great project, and we definitely are learning from it on how to make it even better as we move around the rest of the country.
And just to delve a little bit deeper, as you're making that cost-benefit analysis, if your prioritization is making these installations energy secure, I understand some of the cost concerns regarding the biomass facility at Fort Drum, but it is the model for having long-term certainty and long-term security to make sure that these installations can have access to power when they're potentially off the grid. So how do you make that cost-benefit analysis? How do you go about that?
That's a fantastic question, and I'm not sure I have the definite answer for you. When I first got into this position, that's one of the things we asked ourselves: what's the cost of energy security? What are we willing to pay? 10% more? 15% more? Where does that get us to? 90% reliability, 95%? We are still wrestling with that. We're still working on it case by case. I understand your position perfectly, that we do have a 99.9% reliability. What's that worth and above what we would be paying for a market rate, right?
And from my perspective, that is worth a lot. And the reason why it's worth a lot is because we're looking at that as a model for other bases. So I just want to reiterate why this is an effective model at Fort Drum and why it is worth the investment. And with that, I have no further questions. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman Stefanik. We now proceed to Congressman Carbajal of California.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Henderson, I have the honor of representing Vandenberg Air Force Base. My question is in regard to the Air Force's decision to deactivate all Air Force firefighters that are nationally registered emergency medical technicians and firefighters, paramedics, by rendering their license to operate at medical emergencies as inactive. As I have indicated in my letter to Secretary Wilson, I am extremely concerned not only about this decision, but also the process that was utilized to come to this decision. It is my understanding that the Air Force established an emergency medical services working group comprised of 9 members to address this issue. 8 members were from the Surgeon General's office, and only 1 was from the Fire and Emergency Services. This means 8 out of 9 members working in offices not directly involved in the emergency field made decisions that had to do with emergency services on base. I question as to whether this group had the emergency service experience to make such a decision to reduce the level of emergency medical care to the base population. For Vandenberg, this Air Force working group determined the base only needed a single $1 million ambulance contract covering 97,000 acre Air Force base. Essentially, this single contract warranted the fire departments to be reduced to emergency medical responders. However, it is my understanding that this decision was made without so much as a site visit or even a phone call to understand how enormous this base truly is. One ambulance cannot meet the 12-minute time response standard for ALS, also advanced life support. Even 10% of the time, much less the required 90% threshold. Areas such as major space launch complexes and Missile Defense Authority sites on Vandenberg are out of reach for the single ambulance contractor. The Air Force decision to only require emergency medical responders certification is only setting the bar as low as possible, and it is absolutely unacceptable. Mr. Henderson, this decision is affecting bases nationwide. I just can't understand why the Air Force would want to take away such an important life-saving capabilities from bases. These firefighters already have EMT certifications. Why would you want to purposely go in and require EMR certifications?
Thank you, Congressman. And first of all, just for the committee, I just want to say that the safety and health of our airmen and our families and the people who occupy our installations is of paramount importance to the Air Force. Since we discussed this yesterday, I just want to let you know that we heard you and I understand the issues that you've raised, and I completely understand your dissatisfaction with the response that the Air Force provided you in March on this topic. After we talked yesterday, I went back and discussed this with our staff, and we went through some of the issues that led to that response and to this analysis, and what I've discovered with that is that there's some extremely important issues that you've brought up, and our solution to address them adequately is pretty complex. So what I would like to do, if it's okay with you, Congressman, is take this for the record, so that we can provide you an informed, comprehensive response, because you've raised several important issues there, specifically about Vandenberg, but as you said, this has impacts across their enterprise on specifically the accreditations for the firefighters and whether they need them or don't need them on specific installations. So I'd like to go back and relook our process for doing that and look into the issues you raised and provide a response for the record, if that's okay.
Thank you, Mr. Henderson. I strongly urge the Air Force to stop the transition and reevaluate, as you have stated, the issue and actually talk to the individuals at the base before making further decisions. And I look forward to receiving your follow-up on this. Thank you very much. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, Congressman Carbajal. We now proceed to Congressman Joe Courtney of Connecticut.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the witnesses. Mr. Niemeyer, I'm trying to, again, understand the decision that was made to not proceed with BRAC, again, which I think is a smart decision given, the batting average over the last few years. In your testimony on page 16, again, you described a process of examining usage, demolishing buildings, and then coming back to Congress with options. So, given the fact that I think the department always has the discretion to take down buildings or structures on bases and should, particularly ones that are out of date and inefficient, and that we just did have a report back from the Pentagon last October where, again, it was alleged 19% overcapacity. What are we going to be seeing during the course of this year into next year that we'll come back to Congress, which it sounds, reading between the lines, that's the plan.
Right. So there was some concerns about the amount of excess capacity we provided in that report last year, 19%. It's really tough to go around the military and see 19% excess facilities. And it's tough even inside the department to say, look, that's a compelling reason why we need to go ahead and ask Congress for a base realignment closure authorization. So as a military engineer my whole life, I realized that we need to do more work within the installations world to be able to more efficiently capture what is happening with our facilities. So what we have right now is during years of forced drawdown, you had what a brigade used to be in 5 buildings. The brigade leaves, though that remaining brigade spreads down to 10 buildings. It looks like it's a fully utilized base, but as an engineer, I know that those facilities are only being half utilized. I'm spending heat, I'm spending electricity on inefficiently, trying to maintain a smaller force. So we're working right now in the department through our reform initiative to work with the services. The Marine Corps is already underway. The Army's been doing it for a while and getting better at it. We're trying to get it to be an enterprise look. Okay, let's go back and making sure we are optimally occupying our facilities. I mean, we're doing that we're working very diligently on that effort. We're hoping that efforts like that, by being able to capture exactly where we have excess, is enough for us to be able to talk to the Secretary and then have the Secretary come over and talk to you about the fact we probably do need some type of prudent process moving forward. There's another aspect of this, Congressman, that is, from my perspective, BRAC is not just about saving dollars. Having been through the 2005 round when I was on the Senate Armed Services Committee, we can actually get stronger. We can get more ready. We can get more lethal by being able to consolidate forces, by being able to look at where we might have key realignments. We have emerging technologies. We didn't have unmanned systems back in 2005, or very little of them. We didn't have cyber forces. So how do we lay in those new technologies onto our existing cold water basing structure? Do we even know what a base of the future really should look like? Those are the types of things that I would like to undertake. So we're taking a pause. We're looking at the national defense strategy. We would like to reevaluate to what degree we think moving forward base closures might help us carry out the defense strategy to become more lethal. But we're just with the national defense strategy just coming out 2 months ago. We weren't really in good conscience ready to ask Congress for an authorization for BRAC this year.
Well, I'm impressed with that answer. I mean, it sounds like a very intelligent, smart way to weed out inefficiency and excess. But it also sounds like a process that could take, longer than one fiscal year or one calendar year. And right, I mean, there's something like over 300,000 structures, I think, in the U.S., according to one of your predecessors, as I recall vaguely from a prior hearing. And that does make sense, is that, if there's buildings that should be either abandoned or taken down, you don't need a BRAC. To do individual structures. So I guess again the question is: so is the next Congress, in early 2019, going to get some? Is that when you sort of foresee reporting back in terms of a cleaner analysis?
I owe some analysis and some data back up to the Secretary of Defense, and then allow the Secretary of Defense to make that call where we go from there. Right now, I'm working those questions back to the Secretary.
Right, thank you. Well, again, I think that sheds a lot of light for all of us in terms of, again, an issue that, and this committee obviously is very sensitive. So thank you. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Congressman Courtney. We now proceed to Congressman Anthony Brown of Maryland.
My question's for Mr. Niemeyer. I have a few questions for other panelists, but I'll start with Mr. Niemeyer. It's my understanding that there's about $70 billion of backlog in infrastructure across all the services. That sound about right?
It's we calculate, we throw in a bunch of different factors. We're actually over 100 billion.
Yeah, big number. Want to follow up on some of the, I think your responses to some questions on the Senate side regarding the border wall, which for the purposes of this hearing, I'll just refer to as the southern border boundary. You said that is there an intent to build a 37-mile barrier along the Barry-Goldwater range?
There is an exploration of what options we have for supporting the president's plan. We have not made any decisions. We're still in just the exploration of options. If those options are executed, we'd want to come back to Congress, explain what we think we can do, if we can do it, get and work with Congress to making sure what can be done.
So that maybe I can test your current understanding.
Sure thing.
You understand that there is not a specific line item authorization for the department to construct a border barrier at this time.
We have the FY18 omnibus appropriations bills provided $1.6 billion for certain replacements and upgrades along the 1,800-mile or 1,900-mile border. We know that that's all we have right now. That's been provided.
Do you think $1.6 billion would cover the 37 miles?
Right now, I believe that those funds are dedicated to other segments of the border.
So regarding the 37 miles, you understand that there's not specific line item authorization currently from Congress to the department to construct a barrier?
Yes, sir.
Okay. There is a minor construction program I'm sure you're familiar with. What is the threshold for that under which you don't need authorization?
Well, the minor construction threshold is, I believe, $3 million currently, but that's not an authority that we want to consider here.
That's insufficient to do anything.
There are other emergency authorities that require certain levels of either coordination or proclamations that we are aware of.
And what's the maximum amount you can do under the emergency construction?
Well, under Section 2803, the max per year is $200 million per year. Right. And there's also another authorization for national emergencies that does not have a dollar limit.
Right. So it's my understanding that in order to access that authorization, emergency authorization, you would have to identify another project that's authorized and appropriated by Congress from which to take that money, correct?
Not necessarily. We could draw funds from what we call unobligated balances. Congress provides us, and thankfully so, the flexibility to manage our overall military construction program. So when bids come in less than they should be, we have now that delta. We then put aside to see if we can fund if we have a bid overage, we can go and fund that.
What is the current amount of that?
Sir, I had to get that for your record right now, what we have for prior and unobligated balances. It shifts from month to month as far as.
Is it in the billions?
I don't know if it's quite there yet. The appropriators do a good job at trimming it every year.
I hope they do. I hope they do. I'd appreciate it, sure, if you could get back to me on what that is.
Yes, sir.
And maybe in writing, if you can outline the response that you just provided me.
Sure thing, sir.
And your most current thinking about the authorizations and the appropriations that you would consider in building some or all of that 37-mile barrier at the Barry-Goldwater range. Thank you. Let's see, another question. I'm electronic today. Mr. Niemeyer, certain financial institutions, banks, not credit unions, but banks, can occupy space, commercial office space, on military installations, and it's my understanding that in lieu of a lease payment, they can make an in-kind contribution. Last year, I believe, or certainly subsequent to this year, prior to this year, Congress instructed the department to clarify what an in-kind contribution could consist of, and we were supposed to receive that information on March 1st of this year. To my knowledge, we have not received it. Could you tell me the status of that?
Sure thing. So we've been working on this issue very diligently within the Department of Defense. I've had a couple meetings on how we define that. I've actually got a draft report ready to go. I had some questions for my general counsel on that particular report. As soon as those questions are clarified, we'll be providing it to Congress. And I apologize for being late on that.
Just one follow-up, Mr. Chairman. Do you think it will be before we mark up this year's NDA?
That's my goal.
That's your goal. Okay. I yield back, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Brown. We now proceed to the second round of questions, and Secretary Niemeyer, you come up again. And since the inception of the extraordinarily important European Defense Initiative, Congress has provided nearly $600 million to support the construction in Europe to prepare for EDI. The FY19 request includes nearly $800 million in additional funding dedicated to infrastructure in Europe under the European Defense Initiative. This is for roads, for bridges, it's upgrading of railway, and maybe particularly to take into account the different gauges between the rail systems of what was the former Soviet Empire and the rest of the world. And also, what we're looking for is a positive model in the tradition of the success of Kaiserslautern, Germany. What does the end state of EDI construction look like? Does the department have an overall master plan for the European theater working with the European Union?
So this program is absolutely essential. As you know, the Secretary of Defense laid out 3 overall priorities: restore the readiness of our forces, strengthen alliances around the world, and this program goes directly to the second priority. His third priority was reform how we do business in the Department of Defense. But we are absolutely committed that this program has been beneficial to us with our nations in Europe, and will continue to allow us to have the flexibility with our partner nations to respond to whatever contingency or scenario may happen there. As far as a long-term plan, you did put some language in the FY18 Defense Authorization asking the department to come back with a 5-year plan and how we plan for future investments. We are working to get that over to you. It's really in our policy shop within the Department of Defense. I know we'll be scheduling a time with you and your staff here in the near term to go over what we believe are long-term plans. I can't tell you what the end state's going to be. European Command is the primary generator of requirements. As relationships evolve, as nations in NATO change their posture, our requirements may either go down or go up. We are constantly reevaluating those projects, making sure we're executing them on time, and then as new projects arise, we're vetting them through our DoD structure to determine, okay, what degree they provide support for the Secretary's priorities. So I'd like to take, as far as coming over to you with the plan, I'd like to take that for the record, and then be able to answer more questions, potentially in a classified setting.
Well, thank you very much, and this is really so important. I'm very grateful as the co-chairman of the European Union Caucus to see the cooperation between the American military, the European Union, and NATO. And so this is absolutely critical for the deterrence and peace through strength in Europe. I now proceed to Congresswoman Bardot.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Each of the secretaries this afternoon have stated that their top priority is the recovery of military readiness, and we all agree. But as I pointed out in previous hearings, the increases in this year's budget request appear focused on buying new weapon systems, new equipment, rather than sustaining the systems and the facilities that we own today. So with infrastructure in particular, I believe the department has taken far too much risk over the past decade. So can you comment on whether you believe this budget adequately invests in your service's military infrastructure and how it will support the recovery of installation readiness along with the overall readiness of the force? And I think I'd like to start with Secretary Gillis. We haven't asked you any questions yet, have we?
No, I really enjoy testifying alongside Mr. Niemeyer. That's worked out well for me so far.
He's so adequately experienced in every area.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the question for a change, and I share your concern. You know, the choices that the Army made were a result of sequestration in the Budget Control Act, and we made the choice that we had to make between readiness and facilities. I believe now with the funding in 18 and 19 projected that we are on a much better track. And for 19, our facilities sustainment, restoration and modernization request reflects a $196 million increase above our 18 request. Based on that and requested funding across all the appropriations, the Army plans to address about 8% of the $11 billion backlog that we've talked about in 19, and ultimately buy that $11 billion backlog out over the course of 12 years. In addition, our 19 MILCON budget request is $234 million over and above our 18 request. So we believe we're on the right track, but understand your concerns about the condition of facilities.
And Assistant Secretary Henderson?
Thanks, Congresswoman. So for the Air Force, much like the Army, due to sequestration for the last several years and several of the must-fund requirements that the Air Force is responsible for, not all those requirements took the same hit under sequestration, and some of our support funding mechanisms, especially infrastructure, took an inordinate hit over the last 4 or 5 years. So so now, as you know, we're probably at an estimated $33 or $34 billion of backlog for deferred maintenance and cost to our facilities. And as Mr. Niemeyer alluded to earlier, I just don't think there's a way we're going to buy our way out of that. So a couple of the things that we are doing for a way ahead on this. First, you'll see in the FY19 budget, we've asked for a 7.7% increase in the sustainment part of our facility sustainment, restoration, and modernization. This is a $209 million increase, and this will at least keep the good facilities good. So the essence of your question was, is the funding adequate? I would say it's adequate, but it's certainly not enough to buy down the backlog of deferred maintenance that we have. But by keeping up with the sustainment, you know, every dollar we defer in sustainment turns into $15 of work later. So we're trying to keep up with that for sure. Secondly, we've substantially increased our planning and design funds this year so that we can increase our capability to ask for more money for infrastructure in FY20 and 21 to meet our facilities requirements there and start to potentially grow, get back at that backlog if the funds are available then. Third, we have accelerated our use for enhanced use leases, public-private partnerships, and the new authorities given to us by Congress, and so thank you for that. And I have several examples of that we can discuss maybe in follow-on questions.
Thank you.
We're also leveraging an asset management framework that really focuses on the right facilities at the right time, at the right scope. We're rethinking our acquisition strategy, and so yeah, so it's a tough situation that our mission support community is dealing with right now, but we have a great team of engineers and installation managers and acquisition folks and sustainers that are continuing to keep our power projection platforms intact while the bigger Air Force accelerates the modernization and lethality that we need to fight a high-end war.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to hear a quick response from Secretary Bayer and Lucian.
Gillis.
So, Secretary Bayer, if you could answer.
Absolutely, ma'am. Just we're in about the same situation as you've heard there, obviously. But one of the things, there's a lot of backlog, and I agree that there's probably places that we would eventually say we're just going to cut our losses there. But we're focusing our priorities of where we feel like our priorities are needed. So that's about the smartest thing we can do when we don't obviously have all the money in the world to take care of everything as best as we would like to. But I would say one of the things that I'm most excited about is the ability to use the conversion authority. I saw in one place, I think you'd be interested in this, where a base commander looked at a facility that he wanted to use for ship repair that was near the berth, and it was being used for something else. So he moved the function of that building to another building, he swapped it, and then he used that authority that you all gave us to repurpose that building to perform the function that he needed to be closer to the berth. So these are things that I'm excited about, being able to put the money where it's needed the most, and it gives our base commanders, what I mentioned earlier in my statement, the opportunity for creativity, and we're hoping to use those more broadly.
Thank you, and Mr. Niemeyer.
Yes, ma'am. OSD, we would love to help them more, although we're not the resources. The services carry out their priorities. I think the best thing that OSD can do to support that, we do encourage models such as and programs that allow us to take our limited O&M dollars and put it towards the most urgent requirements to address the most urgent priorities.
Makes sense.
So we are dedicating a lot of our effort into making sure that, okay, yes, we're definitely taking a risk in our counts, but the money we do get is knocking out our most critical facilities.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for being so generous.
Well, thank you, Ranking Member Bardot. We now proceed to Congressman Joe Courtney of Connecticut.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Bayer, I just wanted to touch for a moment on the public shipyard infrastructure situation, which the Navy reported back after our NDA request for an estimate in terms of just what's the task ahead. And again, it was $21 billion between now and 2040. Anyone who's visited any of these yards knows, without much analysis, that these shipyards, particularly with larger Virginia class subs with the payload module extension, and the buildup of the Navy is in general. I mean, the dry docks, they all need to be upgraded. I mean, how do you sort of see, again, it's a long-range plan that was described, but how do you see that sort of fitting in with the budget of the Navy in terms of infrastructure and, trying to make it all sort of come together?
Thank you, Congressman. It is a long-range plan, and I've been in meetings with Vice Admiral Moore, and he and I are thinking the same way, that this optimization plan is phase one, and it's a very good start, but we believe that we've got a lot more work to do. $21 billion is a lot of money, and we, again, want to put that money where it's best needed and can be used to the wisest use. One of the things that I particularly am a fan of is to look more closely and embrace where we can bring in modern technology, not just to optimize our current work processes, which is what the phase one plan looks at, but that we modernize the way we do our operations, and that would give us more efficient operations. I've seen evidence of that, of how some corporate private sector companies are using less footprint but increasing their productivity, and I'd like to see us do more of that. And I would just comment, as on the pier up in New London, that I'm glad to report that there is money in the 19 budget to begin the planning and design for that, and that's a first start.
Well, thank you. I mean, again, obviously a lot of us on this subcommittee and also on the Sea Power subcommittee are very animated about trying to find ways to get to the force structure assessments, 355 ship Navy, but there's a lot of other factors, whether it's workforce, manpower, and obviously infrastructure for that has to sort of also be factored in, or you're going to have a lot of platforms and nobody to operate them, and no place to repair them. So I'm glad you guys are focused on that, because it really is as much a part of the FSA as the sort of top line numbers.
Absolutely. I would like to just comment very briefly that we have seen where at both Norfolk and at Puget Sound, where the rare skill sets, unique skill sets, I should say, that the shipyards themselves are creating training programs where they're bringing in young, talented people and training them on the special skills that we need to grow a workforce. So there's some promising things there, and we want to learn and develop that workforce, but we are paying attention to that.
Thank you very much, Congressman Courtney. We now proceed to Congressman Carbajal of California.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Gillis, as you know, I represent Camp Roberts and SATCOM. As we discussed in our meeting last week, I'm extremely concerned about the degradation of the East Perimeter Road that goes up to SATCOM. Just to let this committee know, SATCOM is designated as a mission-critical facility, so it is important that it is accessible. The road has been completely destroyed, and it is impossible to drive on the road without damaging your vehicle at times, and possibly even yourself. It is my understanding CalGuard has met with DOD and expressed this repair as a priority and requested it to be included in the current fiscal year budget or unfunded request list. I believe one course of action is to pursue a partial repair by repairing the road between Camp Roberts Cantonment area and SATCOM through the O&M restoration project. Mr. Gillis, can you provide me your thoughts and any updates on this matter since we last met?
Yes, sir, I'd be happy to. So it is a critical mission at Camp Roberts, and the need for, or the requirement to repair the road has been surfaced. We are looking now for a way to fund that in 19, and would be happy to take for the record and come back to you as we make progress, but basically trying to figure out the best split of money between the stakeholders involved.
Thank you. Second question. The Army has set a requirement to be able to secure critical missions by providing necessary energy and water for a minimum of 14 days. Camp Roberts and SATCOM are currently depending on gas generators as their backup, but has expressed to me that it is critical that we start looking at battery storage, as gas generators can become a problem if they are unable to obtain the gas from local sources. Talking to your offices, I understand that one of the concern is the high cost of battery storage, but you all are exploring other ideas such as microgrids, especially in the age where cyber attacks can easily disrupt our energy infrastructures. It is important we have the capability to protect our military assets and have the capability to isolate ourselves from the grid that can be affected. Mr. Gillis, in terms of access to battery storage for bases like Camp Roberts, is there something Congress can do? Because at the end of the day, it is about security and resiliency. And in terms of readiness, I can't think of anything more important than ensuring our installations have the capability to operate in any type of domain. Where in the process are we with microgrids? How can Congress assist to possibly speed up this process?
Thanks, sir. I appreciate the question. So a couple of things. Microgrids in general, we are deploying across the Army and are looking as much as we can to leverage third-party financing mechanisms to do it. The Army has an Office of Energy Initiatives that looks for and seeks out those funding sources so that we can contribute to the increased resilience of Army installations. What we're trying to address with our 14-day requirement is to maintain that supply of electricity and water to maintain critical missions. And so we're focusing on those critical missions first to try to increase readiness that way, try to increase resilience that way. At Camp Roberts, for battery storage in particular, I think battery storage is promising because it continues to decrease in price. We just cut the ribbon on a solar project in Huntsville that incorporates solar and battery storage that increases resilience at that installation. So I'm encouraged by the future for battery storage. If I'm not mistaken, you've got some solar assets at Camp Roberts. We've engaged the Office of Energy Initiative to see what can be done to revitalize the sunk cost there and see what we can do to bring that back online as a resource. And you've got my commitment. We'll continue to look to see how we can integrate battery storage into that as well.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I yield back, but I do have one more question if we do another round.
And we now proceed to, thank you, Congressman Carbajal, and we now go to Congressman Anthony Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This question's for Mr. Gillis. It's a pleasure meeting with you in my office. I would have had 10 questions. You answered 9 of them. I only have 1 left. While Congress has provided significant additional funding in 2018, and I'm sure you'll see the same in 2019 for various programs and activities across the Army enterprise, many installations don't have sufficient civilian staffing or manpower to, manage, execute, administer these programs and activities. In Maryland, where most of our installations are in support of RDT&E, missions, we've been seeing reductions in installation manpower, some installations over 30%. My question is there a plan to address these civilian shortfalls? Have you sent it to Congress? If not, when would such a plan be available?
Sir, I know that there are initiatives underway in the Army. I don't have the visibility on those that would allow me to give you an informed answer, so if I could, I'd like to take that for the record, and we'll get the right answer and bring it back to you regarding civilian hiring.
Thank you.
Sir.
And thank you, and you're so kind, because now we can hear the final question from Congressman Carbajal.
You didn't get your questions answered in your office?
I was waiting for you to be done. Thank you, Mr. Chair. The importance of military departments ensuring installations and energy resilience for critical missions and infrastructure has been raised in the most recent NDAA, as well as referenced in the National Defense Strategy and the National Security Strategy. The homeland is no longer a sanctuary, is one quote from the National Defense Strategy in reference to the potential for physical attack, cyber attack, and extreme weather events that could gravely impact our energy-dependent missions. One of the ways your office is trying to ensure increased resiliency on our installations is through the Energy Resilience and Conservation Investment Program, ERSIP. This program has been successful in creating energy resilience on installations nationwide. The Army has committed to advancing the capability of systems, installations, personnel, and units to respond to the unforeseen disruptions and quickly recover. And this will require the service to adopt flexible and adaptable approaches, and programs like ERSIP helps the Army to do this. This nation's military must build resiliency, and this will require more investments into programs like ERSIP. Mr. Gillis, I wanted to hear your thoughts on this and any additional steps the Army is taking to address this concern of resiliency.
Yes, sir. Well, ERSIP is an excellent program. We use that to address both energy conservation and energy resilience initiatives. We believe that energy conservation helps us ultimately achieve resilience more easily. ERSIP is a program that's administered by OSD, by the Department of Defense, and all the services submit projects, and the Army, Air Force, and Navy equally benefit from the existence of the ERSIP program. We prioritize the projects that we submit to that program, and have been very lucky to get very generous funding over the lifespan of the program. In addition to ERSIP, we also use energy savings performance contracts and utility energy contracts to use third-party financing and utility industry expertise to increase resilience on our installations. A couple examples of those more recently is an ESPC that was awarded to include programmable thermostats, demand control, ventilation, interior-exterior lighting retrofits, and a 4-megawatt combined heat and power plant at Fort Huachuca. Reduces energy costs by about 23% to the installation, and it helps us achieve some reliability and progress toward energy security. We've done another UESC at Fort Detrick to centralize boilers, which gives us about $1.8 million in annualized savings, and an ESPC at Fort Bliss should get us about $1.3 million in annual savings. And so, you know, those get us improved utilities infrastructures on our installation, which enhances resilience. So, in addition to ERSIP, ESPC, and UESCs, those are three ways that we address it, and I think address it pretty ably.
Thank you. I encourage your efforts to continue in this regard. Thank you. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
And thank you very much, Congressman Carbajal. And indeed, I've seen the success of the energy savings performance contracts, and best wishes on your continuing. I want to thank all the witnesses being here today, and Secretary Henderson, please extend our best wishes to our former colleague, Secretary Heather Wilson, who I'm happy to claim anytime as a cousin. And we thank all of you for being here, each one of you, and for your service to our nation. I want to thank Mr. Schulman for his service today, too. We are adjourned.